If I can have your attention, please, we'll get started. And once again, I want to thank everyone for making it here. There are some amazing stories still of people traveling and doing extraordinary things, combining modes of transport you'd never even heard of to get here. Our speakers this morning, I think, all have their own stories to tell of getting here, and we're very appreciative that they all are here. Reflecting for a moment on a great day yesterday, which in this day and age now means reviewing my tweets, which may be a little self-indulgent, I don't know, but yesterday there were some great comments, some great philosophies being espoused. Dorothy Nichols saying, "Do something that scares you every day," was pretty awesome. "Begin anywhere" was Kristen Gavin's motto. "Companies don't create brands, people do," from Jill Nichols. Good stuff to think about. Terry O'Neill at lunchtime was, if she had spoken 24 hours earlier, our board of directors could have taken Sunday off and not spent the day on strategic planning. She said, I'm here to talk about women bike and getting more women involved in the bike industry and the bike movement. She said, I want you to turn that around and think about how bicycling can help women address issues affecting them. Philip followed that up at dinner by saying, talk to people about how you can help them solve their problems, their issues, get to their goals, achieve their dreams. And that's a subtle shift, but it's a critical one for us to take. We're still bicyclists. That's who we are in the core. But for most people, bicycling just isn't the end. It can be a means to an end for many more people if we're smart and make it so, and make that happen. 20 years ago, there was a national bicycling and walking study that was published. It was a great document, had some ambitious targets and goals, and it really changed things. The goal was to double the amount of bicycling and walking. We're about halfway there compared to 1994, and cut fatal crashes by 10%. That was done, but we're sliding back towards that. It's time for a new national bicycling plan, a new national strategy, but one that doesn't fall into the traps that Philip described with empty promises and hollow pieces of paper, if pieces of paper can be hollow. We still need lofty goals, the 5X goals that Tim talked about last night, but we've got to be more pragmatic about achieving them. Those goals must be owned certainly by the Department of Transportation, but also by other agencies and interests. And we've got to help those agencies solve their problems, not give them more targets and goals of ours for them to achieve. There's a health panel today, for example, that looks at the Healthy Communities and Healthy People 2020 goals, and we need to be thinking about how we can help the health community achieve those goals, not give them a new set of targets and measures to meet. So we have to position and make the case for cycling to solve transportation problems in the next transportation bill. Which brings us to Congressman Earl Blumenauer and his congressional colleagues and our work over the next 48 hours. If we read and believe the words of Congressman Bill Schuster, Senator Boxer, there will be a new transportation bill by the end of September. I know we've heard that before, and there have been extensions and extensions of previous bills, but something feels a little different this time. Hearings are on. Staff are writing bits of language. The administration is offering suggestions. The trust fund is going broke sooner than we imagined. Something has to change. Something has to happen. To help us navigate this process, to take advantage of the opportunities as they arise, is Congressman Earl Blumenauer, representing Oregon's 3rd District in his 10th term and a guide and mentor to all of us in this room. It's my very great pleasure to welcome Representative Earl Blumenauer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. How tough are you? I got a chance to spend an extra 25 hours in Houston as a result of the weather. And I'll tell you, that was a treat. I had a chance to spend an afternoon with 15 cycling zealots and do a tour in downtown Houston. It was, 15 months ago, I was there campaigning on behalf of their ballot measure. Have you been following what's been going on in Houston? $200 million for bike paths. That measure passed with overwhelming support. And I ran into, shortly before the election for mayor, I ran into a friend of mine, Slender Lake, who's one of the pollsters to the stars, who had done the mayor's survey research. And she said, you'll like to know this. Do you know what her #1 accomplishment was running for re-election? It was the cycling agenda. The cycling agenda. It's already leveraged over $50 million of additional private funding. They're on fire. But that's sort of what I encountered when I was with some of you in Seattle earlier this year, Denver. I was invited last spring to Rochester. Rochester is one of the cities that is most challenged with the collapse of Eastman Kodak, which went from 60,000 employees, I think, to 6,000 employees. It made a difference in a community of 300,000, which is now down to about 200,000. And they've identified cycling as one of the elements to help with their community revitalization, readjusting their infrastructure, sending a signal to the certified smart people that they want not just to be there to go to school, but to stay. This is extraordinarily exciting times. And I think you all ought to be proud for the seeds that you are planting all over the country and that you're nurturing in your communities. This is a critical time, I would think, for the movement and for the changing political climate. I think it may be, however, an opportunity for us to just stop for a moment and ask the universal cyclist question we always ask at this conference. Most of you know what it is. You can repeat after me. Ready? How many people are stuck in traffic on their way to ride a stationary bike in a health club? Some of you saw the cover of The New Yorker last year. A number of you sent it to me, where it's the woman going into the docking station in New York for bike share, and she's looking at the window at the health club where people are riding stationary bikes. This is a special time. And Andy's right. There are some things that are going to be happening here in Washington, D.C. There are little tiny glimmers of hope. I was sitting with Congressman Sayers, who's going to be talking to you a little later about a great idea that he's got. This notion about every day do something that scares you. Sometimes, for Al and me, that's going to work. But things are a little different right now. There was a terrible budget agreement, maybe a D-, but it means we're not going to shut down your government this year. There was an opportunity. Speaker Boehner decided not to be held captive to some Tea Party Republicans and allow the House to vote on a measure to raise the debt ceiling, paying debt for money we've already spent. So we're not threatening disruption of the global economy by defaulting on the national debt. Now, admittedly, that's kind of a low bar. Not wrecking the global economy, not shutting down your government. But for us, that's progress. And for you, that is a sense that things can, in fact, happen. But I would say the message that you have been bringing to Capitol Hill year after year after year has lost none of its resonance. Indeed, it's probably more essential now than ever. You know that bipartisanship can bring people together, create healthier families, healthier neighborhoods, a healthier economy. You'll find a way to tell people on Capitol Hill that $1 million spent in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure creates more jobs than $1 million building a freeway. You know that a well-planned, robust agenda for cycling is the fastest way to create more road and parking capacity. We have the opportunity to help break in a new Secretary of Transportation, and you're going to do it at this conference. He is, I think, a terrific person. He's experienced in local government. I'd been involved with him before he was appointed. He's got great instincts. We've got some new people in some key positions, but I think there's real opportunity in the department. Now, nobody is Ray LaHood, but Secretary Fox has extraordinarily good instincts, tremendous potential to be able to do everything that needs to be done for the cycling agenda. It is time, however, to talk seriously about resources. Yes, there are people on Capitol Hill that are drafting things. They're talking about moving forward with reauthorization. And Andy's right. This is encouraging, but we've heard it before, again and again. We've had, at some points, 9 extensions. But the point he made is that one thing that's a little bit different is we've run over tin cans to kick over, seat cushions to reach behind, for the nickels and dimes to cob something together to limp along. We've run the trust fund down to 0 this year. And unless something is done by October 1st, there will be no resources for additional capacity, for new capacity. We're facing a 30% cut in transportation funding over the next 10 years from already inadequate levels. And we are going to see the Department of Transportation, and the Secretary may well talk to you about this, because they can't go down to 0. They have obligations. They've got to keep certain functions going and deal with cash flow. That means that they're going to start pulling back well before October 1st. You're going to see it this summer. And this spring, because states and local governments can't rely on the cash flow, they're going to start holding back on contracts. Something is very likely to happen. I was invited to speak at a seminar at the Harvard Business School last year. It was really last week. It seemed like last year. It was fascinating. We had 4 or 5 Fortune 200 CEOs. We had people from APTA, the head of the Trucking Association, all sorts of assembled academic and practitioners that really super experts. I had a chance to present my proposal to raise the gas tax for the first time in 21 years. I did point out that it has been 21 years, back when gasoline was $1.08 a gallon, before Barack had met Michelle. And it was fascinating, because I was making a presentation the day after the President had unveiled his ambitious proposal for $300 billion of transportation resources. The day after, my friend, the Republican chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, had unveiled a tax reform proposal that had $150 billion that would have found its way to infrastructure. And both of them, in the morning paper when I was making my presentation, had been declared dead on arrival. So why is it that people are reluctant to look at a gas tax increase? When I unveiled our proposal, I was joined by the AFL-CIO, by the U.S. Chamber, by APTA, the AAA, and the truckers, engineers, the environmental community, a vast array that we've been working with for the last 6 years to deal with issues of transportation policy and funding. And they were there, supporting it. A coalition notably absent from the announcement of the Republican chair of the Ways and Means Committee or the President of the United States. In Washington, you make your own reality, and we've talked about this before, and we have an opportunity to make our own reality when it deals with transportation, infrastructure, and funding. It was interesting. I was followed by Tom Donahue, the president of the U.S. Chamber, and Rich Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO, who both said they don't agree on much, but they agree that we should raise the gas tax. I think it's something that ought to be woven into your approach at home and in Washington, D.C. Now, I know that some of you may be nervous to embrace something that is modestly controversial. But you just lost guaranteed funding and had funding levels cut for things that you care about. What is it that you're afraid is going to happen to you? If nothing gets done, it could get a lot worse in a big hurry. You have an opportunity to be part of a much bigger effort, the coalition that I mentioned to you. If this is a food fight, some of those coalition members are going to toss you under the bike. But if our agenda is part of working with them to achieve their ends, we're part of something that is bigger. I think there's an opportunity to get new allies, to be appreciative of what you bring to the party, because the cycling community has played a key role in conversations about resources at the local level. But make no mistake, you're going to be a player or you're going to be a budget balancer. It is said that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that it is very, very important for you to be part of this critical conversation. It's not a slam dunk. It's only near-fetched. But it is the best opportunity we've got going forward. I'm going to be fighting this effort everywhere I go, and I hope to be able to help you in the broader agenda. Andy's right. It's time for a national bike strategy update or reset, 2.0. I think it is important everywhere you go to ask people what their approach is to filling the revenue gap. People shouldn't be allowed to just throw rocks. They need to have a position. I think it is critically important for you to encourage people here on Capitol Hill to deal with your issues as you deal with them. I think it's time to make sure that everybody is signed up for the Bike Caucus. That's pretty low-hanging fruit, right? We only have a third signed up this year. It might be something to just talk about a little bit. I would suggest that you get a copy of the congressional schedule. This is a test. But it's not that hard to pull off the website of the Democratic or Republican floor leaders, Mr. Cantor or Mr. Hoyer. Get a copy of that schedule when they're back in the district this year. Right now, there are people who are responsible for scheduling these senators and representatives, trying to figure out what they're going to do with her that whole week. Something that would be newsworthy, something that might be a good photo op, something that she might actually like to do, and that they want to do. Anybody have any ideas? Field trips, little tours, demonstrations? America needs you to be successful. You have too much invested not to be part of that big picture so that everybody knows it. I think there is a little optimism in the air. Things are working a little better. Tremendous opportunity. They need to hear from you. They need to work with you. And we need to deliver this agenda together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Earl. Our next guest is Representative Albio Ceres, a teacher and business owner born in Cuba who moved to the U.S. with his family in 1962, became the first Hispanic mayor of West New York, served in the state legislature for a while and was the first Hispanic person to serve as the Speaker of the Assembly, and now is the representative for New Jersey's 8th District. If your congressional map is not finely tuned, that is Jersey City and parts of Newark. And he serves on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, a champion of transit, affordable housing, and now a champion of new opportunities for bicycling and walking. Congressman Ceres.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me this morning to speak. It's not easy after Congressman Blumenauer spoke. He's such a good speaker and such a great advocate for cycling in this country. And all the points that he touched upon, I certainly agree with him. So just bear with me. This is a real modest effort that we're trying to make, but it's a good effort. First, let me tell you a little bit about my district. My district in New Jersey is a district that faces New York City. It's a very congested district. For example, the town that I live in is 1 square mile, and I have 50,000 people in it. The town next is Hoboken, New Jersey, another square mile, and it has another 50,000 people. And Union City is the town next to it. It's about 1.5 miles square, and it has about 70,000 people. So you can imagine moving around the district. It's an effort. Like it was said before, I've been a mayor in this crowded district. And you know, over the years, my observation has led me to rethink a lot of things. And here in D.C., and I have to tell you, when I observe here people cycling and people walking, I came back to my office sometimes horrified, because some of the cyclists had babies in the back, and they obviously were going to work and really had nowhere to go. Luckily, I had a good staffer named Matt Colbert, who is a real cyclist advocate, and he worked on this bill and decided to put this together with my chief of staff and us. It's a modest bill, but I think it's a good start. So Matt's here today. I'd like him to get a little credit for what I'm doing here today. You know, according to a report issued by you, there have been substantial amount rise in the amount of bicycle users on the road, particularly on non-white population. However, minorities are more likely to be involved in fatal accidents than white bicyclists. Additionally, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration states that 47,000 pedestrians were killed and 688,000 injured crossing and walking across the street between 2000 and 2009. And the desire and the need to increase bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure is real. This is why I introduced the new Opportunities for Bicycle and Pedestrian Infrastructure Financing Act, a modest bill which creates a new tool for mayors and communities to finance much-needed infrastructure, including in low-income neighborhoods without adding any spending to the deficit. You know, here in Washington, the deficit's like evil. You know, it's not good, but this bill basically establishes a low-interest, long-term loan program for communities to build biking and walking networks. So far as $11 million in funding is set aside from the $1 billion Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, TIFIA. I didn't come up with that name, but it's a loan program. But even though it's modest, as a former mayor, you can parlay these grants with developers and increase the amount of money that is spent on creating bicycle lanes and walking and pedestrian walkways. We have done it. I know currently Jersey City, Weehawken, and Hoboken, New Jersey, are partnering up 3 communities to start the ride-sharing program. Now, in my district, that's a real big step because it is so congested and people don't like to give up any part of the roads or any part of the crossway. But it's also a beautiful district because we have an easement that is 30-foot long right along the river from one end of the county to the other. You can start at the Statue of Liberty and ride your bike all along, looking at the Statue of Liberty, looking at the Financial Center, going all the way up to the George Washington Bridge. It's about 70% done. Imagine riding your bike and having the Statue of Liberty on your right, or riding your bike and having the Financial Center or the New York skyline on your right, or on your left, depending on which way you're going. You know, currently in TIFIA, the programs have to be $50 million in order to qualify. So I felt that to reach those small communities, we needed to set the program to stand alone for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure projects, meaning that the projects that are small would have a chance to access this money. And furthermore, to address the inequality in access to such infrastructure in the minority and low-income areas, H.R. 3978 will require that a minimum of 25% of each project must be dedicated to low-income and underserved communities. I am pleased to announce that the bill has a bipartisan support, which that's another bad word in this town. When we work together to get something done, we should be doing more of this. I want to thank Ileana Ross-Layton, Congresswoman from Florida, Mario Diaz-Balart from Florida also, and Congressman Andre Carson for the support of the original co-sponsors. I'm also working on the chairman of the Western Hemisphere Committee, Matt Salmon from Arizona, who has shown a great deal of interest in being part of this. both Democrats and Republicans are eager to invest in our communities in a manner that is practical and fosters economic growth. H.R. 3978 does this through investment in local projects and develops solutions to increase non-motorized travel. Additionally, the new opportunities for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure does not require the authorization of any new funding. This legislation will benefit both urban and rural communities seeking to provide increased access to alternative forms of transportation. It is my hope that Congress will consider this bill similarly to invest in bicycle infrastructure. If you're wondering, I do own bicycles. I have a bicycle here in Washington, D.C. that I take to Hines Point, but every time I ride the bicycle, all I hear is, on your left, on your right. Everybody just blowing by me. It's sort of embarrassing that you have all these people going by you, but I do enjoy just riding around, getting exercise, and getting the fresh air. But I thank you again for inviting me, and let's work together to see if we can get this modest bill through. It really is, I think, a first step. In my district, certainly, it's not arrogant, but we can certainly work together, to increase bicycle lanes and pedestrian crossways. It really does help in my district because most people work not that far of a distance from where they live. And to finish it off, I have to say that my grandfather rode a bicycle till he was about 75 years old. And one time, this is embarrassing, he got picked up by the police because somebody said that this fellow took his bike and supposedly stole the bike. So since my grandfather didn't speak English, he couldn't tell the police that it was his bike. So we had to go to the police station and explain to the police chief that my grandfather has been riding his bike for so many years and it's his bike. So once they found out, obviously they were worried about a lawsuit, so they apologized to my grandfather. Even in Spanish, they apologized to him. So, but I thank you very much for having me this morning.
Thank you very much. That's awesome. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Congressman, thank you very much. That was great. And all of this crowd of people here will be up on the Hill tomorrow trying to get co-sponsors to the bill, and we really appreciate your leadership and guidance in this. Now we're going to shift from the federal to the local and bring back to the stage someone who's helped shape our world for the last year. Douglas Meyer with Bernuth and Williamson, if you remember, did the research last year on how our message is perceived in Congress, and it was really instrumental in kind of reshaping some of our thinking. So much so we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see how mayors and local elected officials see the cycling movement and our issues and agenda and what we can do to work better with them. And so it's my great pleasure to welcome back Douglas Meyer. Morning.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to be back at the Bike Summit. And as you may recall from last year, we went out and spoke to 30 national leaders, staff members on the Hill, as well as leaders from the Department of Transportation about their perceptions of bicycling and walking in our transportation infrastructure. And what we heard, well, I learned the word multimodal, which I didn't know before. And what we heard a lot was that the opposition that we believed was there to bicycling actually had a lot more to do with where the money comes from and how it's allocated. And we learned a little bit of, I think, lessons about how we, as cycling advocates, and I'll weave myself into that, I'm also a cyclist, so I professionally divorced myself from that when doing this work, but personally I like to see these things moving forward. some lessons we can learn. So that research, if you weren't here last year or haven't had a chance to look it over, maybe before you go up on the Hill tomorrow, may be of help. One of the things we did hear also was that the importance of where things were really moving was at the municipal level, in the cities, and the city leadership. So Andy and Karen asked me to go back, along, as we'll get to in a minute here, with the good folks from the Urban Land Institute, and talk to 40 city leaders from across the country. So let's talk about, well, these are the 4 things I'm going to cover today, and if I do this well, I'll be done in about 20 minutes. So if somebody out there, if I start rambling on, there's a lot here. Unless you're, anybody a speed reader? Unless you're a speed reader, you'll see that in my slides I have a lot of verbatims, quotes from people we spoke with. This will be available for download later, so don't worry if you can't read all the quotes as we're going along. I'm just going to give you the top level. We'll also talk about who participated. The key part where I really want to focus is what we found out, and some recommendations, if I may, as to looking across those 40 cities, what would we say back to you all about where things stand and how to move forward. Let's see. So the purpose of this, again, was to go out and obtain, through a series of in-depth interviews, the candid opinions of city leaders across the country about bicycling and walking, look at the findings, going for trends across as well as key points within, and provide some recommendations. In our process, for those of you who are not familiar with qualitative research, I know a lot of attention right now is to big data. We're kind of small data. We go out and talk to the people who really are making the things move and give them confidentiality. Nothing they say to us is for attribution. So we don't identify them, and you'll see that none of these quotes are identified neither by person nor city. That's part of the process that allows people to speak freely without fear of having, somebody get upset with them. What we found was a high, these are their perceptions. And a key point here is that perceptions are reality in our world. If somebody believes it, it is true, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's objectively true. So just keep that in mind. We did hear a lot of strong consistency across these cities, and please don't assume you can identify who said what, and no, I won't tell you. So who participated in this? We did a series of interviews over the last 2 months with mayors. A number of mayors took 30 to 40 minutes, 45, some even went on for an hour. Deputy mayors, chiefs of staff, senior advisors. The League really helped us. They wanted a diversity representing the kind of, which I've learned is the PSG level, the platinum, gold, and silver, the bronze level, and then as well as some unranked cities that are maybe looking at this but haven't done as much to earn one of those rankings yet. Also with ULI, which as you may know has 30,000 members, and around the world they're looking at urban development issues. They have a Rose Center fellowship, so some of their cities participated in that fellowship. We looked at a diversity across the country, from the Northeast, South, Midwest, and West, as well as we were a little tipped to the larger and medium-sized cities, but also had a chance to talk to 5 cities of smaller size. Well, let's get into the findings. I think that's where everybody wants to go. We'll talk about, or what I want to cover with you today is how accepted is this idea of including bicycling and walking and transportation at the city level? Who's having influence over that conversation at the concept level? Again, this idea of doing this. When it turns from idea to implementation, what are some of those key ingredients for success? What are the lessons that people have been learning? What do they think about the federal role? You heard the congressman talking earlier about some of the things that are moving at the national level. You're going to be meeting with folks. What do these city leaders have to say about that? And then they always have some final thoughts, particularly knowing that this was going to be presented here today at the National Bike Summit with you all. And then finally, our recommendations. The extent of acceptance of this concept really bowled us over. This comment is very typical of what we heard. Everyone's bought into this idea, and the support is increasing. And what was interesting to us is we were asking this question in the present tense. What is inspiring your city to look at this? And they said, no, 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 what was? We had a lot of public interest, and one thing that took us a little bit by surprise is we started calling it the shame factor. There were a good number of cities, I have to point out, that had been named to worst cities for bicycling, or, forgive me, but I guess the list is the fattest cities in America. And that had inspired some attention from people. That, again, was just for the impetus, not carried on. All right, so here we get into the meat of it. Are people talking about bicycling or bicycling and walking? We heard a lot about this at the national level, and we heard it again here. It's more this shift to multimodalism. It's getting people from A to B in a way that's convenient, safe, and hopefully also with bicycling and walking, fun and healthy. It's not so much one or the other. Bicycling is pretty much dominating the conversation between the two right now because the infrastructure investments are larger, it seems. Again, the concept level, supported, accepted, acknowledged. The person I spoke with who said this must have repeated it 4 times in the conversation over the half hour. Opposition is in the minority. I love this. Met with really, dude, that's so 70s. So the idea is there's always going to be pushback on any issue, but the amount of pushback on this idea of including bicycling and walking is fairly nominal. And that it really is more when you get into the implementation and the actual where is this going to go, how's it going to do. But that basic idea of doing this has a lot of support. And that support's been advanced by this idea of improving quality of life. What came up in almost every conversation is quality of life for my city. We want this to be a place where people want to live, work, and play. Now, you have to dig a little deeper under that because quality of life can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And what we learned is this is quality of life. You know, I'm now 45 this year. It's not me. It's certainly not my parents' generation. I like this quote because they included 40, so it made me feel young. But we heard a lot of this. I've come to understand in that the new world, I'm an anomaly. This is an older person speaking, and younger people than me are really focused on this. So its quality of life is defined by the millennial generation. It's almost always implicitly or explicitly tied to economic development. It's not just I want to please young people, but I want to attract young, vibrant workers to my city and the companies that want those workers to be there. You know, as this person said here, that's going to form the basis of our economic development for the next 25 years. It's often fueled by competition between cities. And there was some trash talking, I got to tell you. It was pretty amazing. The amount that cities are doing right now, and we heard about $200 million investments. We heard, you know, investments in the hundreds of millions of dollars in this idea. And I love this. If some other city thinks they can beat my city by installing a car-only system, let them try. We're going for it with bicycling and walking. I don't know how much more you can ask for than that. Occasionally, it's connected to health concerns. And for a few cities, I'd say about 5 of the 40, this is a real driver issue that they're looking at. When you talk about how do you measure success, for almost every city, they're going to be measuring success of this program into how do they appeal to younger generation? Do they attract businesses? Does it add to the economic of the city? A number of cities are also looking very seriously at health measures. And this played, again, a big role in getting a lot of these cities rolling, if you will, on the idea. We all know, and is almost any bike advocacy site I've looked at over the last couple of years would tell you, there's a long list of reasons why people say cycling is a good thing to include. So we looked at those as well, and what we have to say is that some arguments work only in some places. So it really does, you have to know your own city. But the environmental message, we heard last time that people at the national level weren't really believing this is going to have a major environmental impact. I wouldn't say these messages are necessarily, they're not backfiring, but they're just in some places, people will just nod along, but they're not driving the conversation. Only in the minority of cities where we had a couple that said, you know, concern about the environment's really driving a lot of our change. So you got to know your own city for these more nuanced messages. Safety, there was a little bit here almost of like, don't question my commitment to safety. If you come in and tell me that I don't care about safety, you know, those are fighting words. So you have to be really careful with the safety message. And again, safety is only driving the conversation in a few places we spoke with. Personal economics and equity issues, again, for some cities, very, very important. For the majority, not a driver, but it is something that they like as kind of a bonus or add-on. And same with congestion. Here we saw a difference between kind of smaller cities and larger cities. And know that if you go into with a congestion message in a city that it's easy to drive in, parking's relatively cheap. It's not Jersey City, it's, you know, a Midwestern city, let's say. That message is not going to resonate as well. What did we hear that was backfiring? And I'll say there's only two things. Does anybody own a one less car t-shirt? Start using it to clean your chain. Get rid of it, burn it. Anything that comes across as anti-car is, you know, I'm out of my car, you should get out of yours. The follow-up to this quote was, that's just not smart. I may believe you, I may agree with you, but it's not smart to say out loud. It just adds fuel to a fire that you don't need to stoke. And the other one is, now that these cities, and they've come around really quickly, this has been a rapid change, but they see now themselves as kind of part of the family. They're bought into this. And so it's almost like, it reminds me of like fighting with my brother growing up. You know, you poke your brother, you punch your brother, that kid from down the street comes after you. What are you talking about my brother? You know, and this is what you have here. If a city sees itself as supportive and bike advocates are out publicly critiquing that city, be careful when you do that. It's not considered on par with other modes, and a lot of questions as to why even bother asking about parity. The automobile is still the dominant form of transportation, or transit's maybe more important. It doesn't really matter. Bicycling is part of the conversation, and then find the things that actually work. So who's having influence over this? And I grew up in Indianapolis, so this is my little shout out to Mayor Ballard from Indianapolis, because I'm impressed every time I go home what he's done. Get yourself a mayor. I don't have the great accent, but that message remains. This is kind of our little formula we heard. The mayors are really driving this. You know, cycling groups and young professionals are supportive, but they don't drive the agenda. The mayor has the pulpit. So the mayor can set the vision, but they've got to have an insider, a champion, somebody who's going to follow this through, somebody who's going to get down in the weeds. As this person put it, I can't overstate the role that a champion on the inside can play, as no matter if a mayor believes in this, they aren't going to get involved in the weeds. And we heard that time and time again. Advocates who've learned to operate as allies. This was a big point for people. A number of those champions we heard actually came from the bike advocacy community. So knowing that they are there, the role, Andy, I've heard him refer to it as, this is bike advocacy 3.0. It's very different to work with a city that sees itself as supportive and wants to make these changes, as opposed to a city that's opposed and recalcitrant to them. So we actually heard some people got really upset about this. They felt like, hey, I'm trying to push things through as fast as I can, and I got my bike advocates out critiquing my city in the paper and my mayor in the paper. Be really careful when you choose to go that way, was what we heard. And then businesses. Having business is part of this, and the developers, not there in all cities, but when they're there, wow, does it make a difference. 2.5 years ago, there was one group that would go on and on about this, but now we have a diversity of private sector, government folks, and advocacy groups talking. That combination, the whole, really is greater than the sum of the parts. And we heard that again and again and again. We also would ask in these conversations, who more or who else needs to be speaking up in favor of cycling? And what we heard on that point was a lot of variation. Again, this is where you have that top line influencers, broad agreement. You get into like city to city. In some cities, we heard a lot about chambers of commerce that were supportive but not yet vocal. We heard a little bit in some places, they said, gosh, it's the school district, it's the bike industry. We've not heard anything from bike retailers. We've not heard anything from our health community. So no, again, in your city, it may vary. Let's look at implementation. So we have this idea. It's widely accepted. How does it turn from concept to actually implementation? And the idea, or the overarching feedback was that there's not one thing. It's a combination. So we look through and kind of go through all of the things that people have said over the course of these conversations. And we've tried to pull out for you what are the 5 big ones. And you'll hear again a lot of echoes, in fact, of what other speakers have said already. At one point, I turned to someone last night and said, gosh, I should just point to Philip and say what he said. But the number one is political leadership. That combination of mayor and internal champions, somebody in the city who's really behind this and going to see it through and is willing to put out some political capital for it. First and foremost, having the buy-in of the mayor and then having an issue owner who really cares and has the mayor's ear. We heard this a lot. The second is community support. And this is a point Philip raised. When people say community support, it's a little bit of that. It can't just be we're going to build it and they will come. It's got to be in an area where there is some support for this. And we heard a lot from city leaders who said, look, there are some people that are never going to be satisfied, never going to be bought in, and sometimes you just have to say it's not worth it. This particular person, I can tell you, then relayed a story of 2 streets in their town. One that they felt was really critical to their bike network, one that they felt was less so. And when they had a lot of opposition in the less so, they said, we're going to let it go and move those resources over to a place that's more actively pushing for this. The bike advocates were upset. And they said, well, we just have to, we can't push this on people. We got to go to the, where the path of least resistance is often not a bad path to travel. Having some early demonstration projects and successes was another thing people cited over and over again. And I have to give a lot of credit here. Is anyone here from Rails to Trails? Rails to Trails got cited a lot here, those early projects that got people out on bikes, especially when they were positioned well within a network. Things that took advantage of local scenery. If you can ride along and see on your right or on your left the skyline, that's a great thing. It gets people excited, interested. And we heard about a trend where a lot of these cities are moving to this, Mayor Bloomberg had a shout out here about this idea of smaller projects to really test and see if they're working. Connectivity was a bit of a surpriser to us. The idea that you had to show people that what you're doing is connected to a larger network. If a project seemed to be isolated and on its own and didn't connect not to a larger bicycling network or pedestrian, but to a larger A to Bism network, how to get people around. And the last thing was, this is the elephant in the room, allocated funding. When money's on the table, people line up behind it. The obstacles that we heard cited were often the flip side of these opportunities. Traffic engineers, right? Everybody hears about traffic engineers. Mostly what we heard about traffic engineers was if they're told to do it, they'll do it. If they don't have to do it, they won't. Okay? So it's something to keep in mind, and that there's going to be a lot of transition period and time for change. We looked at this question. I'm going to skip over that quickly to get to the idea of, are these investments generating economic value? Very few people say they have hard numbers here. I'd actually say this is an opportunity for the bike advocates to go out and help them gather some of that research and data. How is this affecting economic development? How is this affecting health measures? Because a lot of them, as you'll see here, we don't have the time to do our own research. They're relying on external groups to do a lot of this research. But on the very positive side of things, there's a lot of, and almost everyone, in fact, I think everyone we talked to cited some sort of anecdotal example of how this is having an effect. We have businesses calling us wanting a bike share station. We have somebody calling us wanting that bike path extended out to their company. And what about bike share? Bike share, we know, had a big impact, DC bike share, on the national conversation. People started to see this as a transportation network. We heard that again at the city level, especially for getting people to try it out. It's kind of like your, I don't know, for lack of a better phrase, your starter drug to cycling. If you have a bike share, and it also gets different people out, it's not the spandex-clad cyclists, it's professional and especially women. The more women that are seen out riding, the more real this appears to people. If people don't, if they have bike share, they tend to like it. If they don't, they want it. On the federal role, politics gets in the way, politics makes things happen. And money is the big thing here. People want the money, but they need flexibility around it. And what I'll say is we were really shocked at the number of cities that said, look, we're doing this. If you're not going to help us, just get out of our way. It was really surprising to us. I mean, funding would be helpful, but most importantly, get out of our way. We know what's best at the local level. Allow that funding to go down to the municipalities and adhere to the municipalities' plans. Don't have it stop with the state. Are they talking with the Hill? I wouldn't assume it. Very few are actually talking specifically about bicycling the way that you are. If you prepare something, these cities are going to sign on, but it's still a relatively small part of their overall federal agenda, even within something like the transportation bill. That's not to say they're not supportive, but there's a role for you to play in helping them navigate and get through that. Some final thoughts. The big one here is institutionalizing the changes that have taken place today. Philip mentioned this last night. Things have to go. They're at this level now. A lot of the people we talked to or were appointed to are not even in permanent positions in their governments yet. Until there are permanent positions, I love this, we needed a formal role, an office of bike with someone who can help us understand government and advocacy. Play that brokering role. A lot of additional insights you can look at if you download my presentation. But let's go through to the recommendations and wrap up here because I think I'm at my time limit. The first I'd say is appreciate and applaud the progress that you all have made to date. It is remarkable as someone who's looked at a lot of different issues to see the changes of the last 3 years in perception on bicycling and walking. Stay positive. Negative messaging, great for short-term behavior changes. Positive messaging, long-term behavior changes. Kind of basic social change stuff, but especially when you have a city that sees itself as an ally, applaud those champions as much as you can publicly, even if you kind of punch them in private like I did to my brother. Come prepared and participate in meetings. Woody Allen's line about half of it, or 90% is just showing up. When a lot of these decisions are being made in community meetings where 10 people show up, they tend to be older folks. If you have 10 bike advocates show up, all of a sudden your voice is being heard. As one person put it to me, if you're a bike advocate, start getting used to going to nighttime neighborhood meetings. Inwardly bike-centric, outwardly multimodal, same thing we heard last time. Share stories of success and plans for the future. WIFM is the usual acronym, what's in it for me. For you all, it's what's in it for others. This is what Andy talked about. How does this help the health measures? How does this help transportation? Start helping them gather up this evidence that these things are making a difference. Institutionalize the idea, and of course, remember, these are the big picture broad findings across the cities in America. Know your own city and ask them how you can help. So with that, thank you very much, and the presentation's available for download if you want to catch all the quotes.
That was great. Thank you. That's perfect. No, you're good. You're good. Thank you, Douglas. That's great. So who could we get to follow this? Maybe a mayor? Check. New to office? Check. Competitive city? Pittsburgh? Competitive? I don't know. Is Pittsburgh competitive, Liz? A little bit. A little bit. It's my great pleasure to welcome both to sort of respond to what he's just heard, but also to talk about the great city of Pittsburgh, Mayor William Peduto, who is the 60th mayor of Pittsburgh. He's been in office for 2 months, almost 2 months, so you must have the hang of it by now. But you're a bit of a political operative and a politician's politician, having been on city council since 2002, been a political consultant and worked with Congress people here in Washington, D.C. Penn State graduate, Mayor William Peduto. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Good to see you.
So These were the notes I had my staff put together, and after listening to that, all right, thank you. It's great to see everyone made it. Kind of atrocious conditions if you're in the Midwest or the East Coast. It's been kind of the trend this winter. I got sworn in on the polar vortex, which was symbolic. A lot of people said it would be a cold day in hell before I was ever elected mayor of Pittsburgh. So haven't really got a break since then. I decided instead of taking a 9-hour plane trip for a 45-minute trip to get here to drive over the mountains, and I was thinking about George Washington, who as a young major in the Virginia militia walked through that trail and really put together the area between Washington and the city of Pittsburgh. And many people don't realize that part of Pittsburgh's history. But I was also reminded of a conversation I had with the president in December, because I had the opportunity to meet and ask for things. That's what mayors get the opportunity to do. And I had 5 asks that went from early childhood initiatives and making Pittsburgh the pilot program of creating an early childhood initiative for our little Pittsburghers, to number 5, which was the scaffolding of the Washington Monument. And he just sort of looked at me and said, "What do you want that for?" And I said, it would be really cool if the Great Allegheny Passage started at the Washington Monument and ended at the Washington Monument. And we're in the process right now of actually trying to get it. So it may actually happen for our 200th anniversary in 2016. Pittsburgh is a city that goes and has gone through great transitions. We were that western frontier that I spoke about, that area where the French put up Fort Duquesne and said, we are here. This is as far as this New World will go. And then the British came in and said, wait a second, we want this area. It has the great access to all the rest of this world. And they loved us so much they fought the First World War over us. And then, following in that, people decided this is a fortress city and we'll create a fort here and this will be the destination of this brave new world. And then somebody discovered Ohio. And they said, okay, it goes a little bit further. And we need somebody to build it. We need somebody to build this new world. So they looked at Pittsburgh, and we supplied the world with glass, and then iron, and then steel, then aluminum. And we helped to build a whole world. And in the process, we became a global leader in industry, a city that produced more steel in World War II than Germany and Japan combined. And we realized something in that process, that we had given away a lot in that sake to chase the almighty profit. We had destroyed our environment, and we had basically created great disparity with our people. So we started our third phase, which we called the Renaissance. And it was an era in order to try and bring back the things that we had lost through the chase to become a global leader of industry. We created the first clean air standards in the country. Decades before Congress would ever look at the Clean Air Act, Pittsburgh had passed clean air standards and created a model for which other cities and then the federal government would follow. A brave young woman who from the Allegheny Valley marched up the steps of the Capitol Hill to fight for clean water. Her name was Rachel Carson, and helped to not only fight for clean water, but was a leader in creating the environmental movement. And from those steps and the steps of making sure that people who worked 40 hours a week could join the middle class, Pittsburgh was reborn, and that was the third part. And then in 1979, when I started high school, and the Steelers won the Super Bowl with Terry Bradshaw, and the Pirates won the World Series with Willie Stargell, Pittsburgh died. Our entire economy was ripped out from under us. We lost more population than New Orleans lost after Katrina. There was no bailout, even though our economy completely tanked and we saw unemployment of 18%. And we just had to do what we knew. We had to brush ourselves off and start to rebuild and build a new city. And it's taken us 30 years to get there. And right now we're at that cusp of this new city. And it's a city that has been reborn not only by its economy, but by investing back into its environment, investing back into its people, and looking at the infrastructure of what makes a city great. And that's the best job in the world, because right now I get to put my hands on that steering wheel and help to get a part of making it happen. So in the 90s, while we were going through that transition, Pittsburgh was rated as one of the top 5 worst cities to ride a bike. I don't even know what the number was. It's probably up in the top 3, but we like to say the top 5. And through those years and through the progress that we've made through organizations like Bike Pittsburgh and other advocacy groups and the foundation community, yeah, let's hear it. I saw Scott somewhere back here. I'm going to be, there he is, singling him out a little bit later. We have now been rated as a bike-friendly city, joining the ranks of the top couple of dozen, and our goal is to become in the top 10. We want to be able to show you and make the example of how a city with crooked, weird streets that don't work in any grid system, with hills that would remind you of you're in the deepest craters of Europe, that run right into rivers, with areas that don't have enough area for sidewalks, let alone bike lanes, where all the old infrastructure just says it's impossible, where you can make it happen. And we're very, very honored that this year in September, we're going to be asking all of you to come to Pittsburgh to join us for the summit. And during the summit, we're going to be looking at a few different things. You know, and the stats that my staff put together for me really do speak to this next Pittsburgh that we're building. 30% of the people in Pittsburgh either walk, bike, or take public transit to work. That puts us at number 8. But you know what? We can even do better than that. Just over the past few years, we've invested in over 30 miles of on-street bike infrastructure, 500 bike racks, and started bike corrals and bike valet service. Let me explain that to you, because when I first took office as a councilman in 2002, we had a heated debate whether or not to install bike racks. Whether or not to install bike racks, because if you put those things on the sidewalk, then those kids, they're going to want to drive on the sidewalk. And that was literally like 2 days worth of debate. And we've been able to pass through that basically by doing exactly what was said before. Use the examples that are small. Show people, and don't dismiss people's fears, because people live in those fears for a reason, whatever they are. Try to understand them. Even sometimes you're going to be knocking your head against the wall, and say, okay, I can show you how this will work. And once you win people's minds and their hearts, then you get them on your side and you create allies. It's a very critical part for us to understand, but something that almost went like a light switch once it happened. The understanding of, hey, maybe that tree doesn't have to be a bike stand. Maybe we could actually have some infrastructure in place and at the same time create a really high quality design that enhances the neighborhood business district and gives it identity. We're launching a citywide bike share program. Yep, we're catching up with you. That should be done in the next year. This has been a lot of work again, and a lot of the lessons learned go back to that very same thing. If you want to get people involved in the process, get them and let them feel like they're involved in the process at the beginning. Go to those community meetings, sit in those church basements, talk about the idea and how it could help to benefit that neighborhood, instead of going through the channels of planning and zoning and then making people just automatically put their back up against the wall because they felt they were never listened to or had a voice at the beginning. The world's changed. No longer is the bike community on that side of being pushed out. It now has, the cycling community has the opportunity to set the agenda. Go back into the communities where these changes are happening and let them feel that they're a part of it with you. We're actually looking at changing our codes to relax and remove parking minimums. And this is in densely populated areas of the city. And remember, we're a city that went through 30 years, 40 years actually, of population decline. So we're not one of those cities that are booming where this is a necessity. We're doing it in order to encourage bike sharing as a program, in order to encourage the less need of the use of a car, in order to encourage developers to not have to put in surface parking lots or dig down several feet and then ask for a TIF because they can't afford the parking infrastructure that they're putting in. All of these things make common sense, but usually they only happen in areas that are boom. In areas that are starting to take off and grow, we can do the same things, and we should be leading on that effort. And then simply education. The education with bikers and drivers and pedestrians and everyone. Everyone here, it's like preaching to the clergy. You guys know this. It's a constant battle. You fight on Twitter every day, and somebody puts something out there, and it just gets under your skin, and you know you have to respond, right? And then it starts this constant battle between pedestrian, cyclist, and motorist. The roads and the systems need to be built for everyone, and we know that. And in Pittsburgh, we're adopting the philosophy of complete streets, not simply as a way to help to promote but as a way for economic development, so that every new project that's coming before the city has to have a complete streets model in it. And on top of that, because we have this crazy little downtown area that was basically designed as a two-grid system that doesn't mesh at all, we have this opportunity to take a large swath of land in a densely urban area and create a complete streets model that could become a model for anywhere. Again, because of the challenges that we have, both in the infrastructure and in the just basic history of our town, we can help to show that if you can do it in Pittsburgh, you can basically do it anywhere. There's a lot of different areas that you're going to have the opportunity in September to see. Our transportation plan that we've been working on that's going to be updated and done a little bit more, a sustainable component of it that we'll be addressing, the investment between departments and city government to get the silo effect broken down so that this becomes sort of overall policy, and designing a true multimodal transportation system, one that actually looks back as well. Because in older cities like Pittsburgh and different industrial areas, you still have a lot of rail infrastructure. Many of it have been abandoned or simply not being utilized that could be instantly converted to heavy rail, commuter rail, and an option that then could tie into the light rail systems, the bus rapid transit systems, bike and others to create multimodal in a way that uses the old infrastructure without a lot of money. And hopefully when you get there and when you're at the Pro Walk, Pro Bike conference, you'll have an opportunity to see this. Just 3 points that I want to leave you with, because when I'm listening to this study, it really rings true. Everything that was said is absolutely true. And mayors have the ability to set policy and agenda that can help to put resources towards where they need to go. And that's why the first part is so important. Work with community. Why is that? Because economic development dollars, planning dollars, any type of public money flows like a river. And once it hits a rock, it goes around it. It doesn't go through it. As advocates, you have an opportunity to get the rocks out of the river. And that requires the heavy lifting at the beginning of the process, not once the proposal is already being made. It means, as I said before, don't start at the zoning counter. Don't start with the planning commission. Look at those areas in your cities that you know are going to be developed sometime. You see it, you ride by it, and you say, one day this whole area is going to be redeveloped, and we need to have access through it if it does. And start putting together those plans now, so that when the time does come that that developer is found, that you have the plan in front of them in order to make it happen. Working with the community at the forefront takes care of so many of the problems later on. And let me tell you some advice I give to my community, because developers can always hire more attorneys or pay attorneys more hours. So I always tell the community it's best to fight at the beginning when you have the leverage to make the change happen than to try to fight at the end when the attorneys in the courts will probably roll against you. But the other thing to always learn is if a developer wants to build a building and they're allowed to have 4 stories and they're asking for 7, the community, if you come back and you say, we're fine with 5, you're going to lose. Always ask for 6, because then they feel they get their pound of flesh by getting that down to 5. So when you're looking at putting together your plans and you're working to try to get, always ask for a little bit more than what you're comfortable with, and understand that that part of the compromise will come back to you and you'll be able to get to where it is that you want to get to. It's a little trick, it works. I've had worked on over $2 billion worth of development. It really does work. Help others. You know, these are lessons for Mr. Rogers, Pittsburgh guy, right? Work with the community, help others. Help others just means you work within the advocacy of cyclists. When you see a similar cause or somebody who you can also support, work around whatever 501c, whatever you are, in order to be a partner with them. If it's on a social justice issue, if it's on an environmental issue, if it's on a workers' rights issue, if it's on something where your membership feels you can be a part, join with them. Lend your support to that, because the next time when your help is needed, you're going to find that union, that faith-based organization, that environmental group standing with you. And what that will do is give you much more power and ability to get what you want done than simply by advocating by yourself. It works. It was collective bargaining, collective power that made changes in every critical part of this country's history. And on a local level, it is the most effective way to get stuff done when you can pull together. We have a very, very strong progressive coalition within the city of Pittsburgh that has pulled together all these different organizations. And one of the most important days that I had in city council was when a group came because the state was considering anti-Sharia laws against our Muslim brothers, and the people who spoke out against it were the United States Iron Workers. And I felt like Pittsburgh has finally come into the 21st century. And when I went out in that hall with the group from CARE, they actually had tears in their eyes that these guys would actually stand for them. But they stood for them because they were there when they needed a prevailing wage. It works when you work together, and you'll find you have a lot of common friends. And finally, build your base. When I talked about that time when we could barely get bike stands on curbs, on sidewalks, it was at a time before Pittsburgh had a bike advocacy group. And the debate really wasn't about the need for public infrastructure. It was a political debate between old and young. And at that time, Pittsburgh had still not made that turn. We still hadn't been able to catch that economic bubble. And so old Pittsburgh versus new Pittsburgh kept losing. Foundation community realized at that time, too, that there needed to be an organization that was devoted to cycling issues. And they created Bike Pittsburgh. And Bike Pittsburgh hit the ground running. And they never stopped. They now have over 2,500 members, larger than the Pittsburgh Democratic Committee. They now have membership that is actively engaged. I try to get them to register as Democrat, their independence and everything else, but they're still they're involved and they're engaged. And they understand that their advocacy and what they push helps Pittsburgh change and is helping us get through that next phase of what we're going to become. That type of organization is needed in every city. I'm honored to have a great leader and somebody who's helped it make it very easy for elected officials to join on because he's been able to build an organization that you can't ignore. I want to take 1 second just to embarrass him and make him stand up. Scott Bricker from Bike Pittsburgh. Scott, I just wanted to use this as the opportunity when you're here with your colleagues, and so that they understand as well. If you put in the hard work, you do the right thing, you work to make it so that you can make your city better, you should be rewarded. I get to appoint 3 people to our MPO that represents 10 counties in all economic development decisions regarding transportation. My first nominee today is Scott Bricker from Bike Pittsburgh. And Scott becomes the first cycling advocate to be on this board in the 1,516 years it's been around now. Scott, congratulations, well earned, and thank you. Hey, September, one last thing I promise you, you're gonna have fun. We are gonna open up our city. You're gonna be biking your legs up trying to do, you got 1 hill to climb today, Capitol Hill? I'm gonna give you like 70 hills to climb, and you're gonna have a great time. You may even get my lazy ass out there. So thank you so much for letting me be here. I'll see you in September.
Thank you, that was awesome, perfect. You notice you didn't wait to see if Scott was going to accept or not. Thank you. September 8th through 11th is the time to be in Pittsburgh. And I was already asked last night, when does the ride leave Washington to get to Pittsburgh for that event? I'm sure there'll be one. I'm sure WABA or someone will be putting that together. But I'm looking forward to spending a few days in Pittsburgh. Very quickly, 2 announcements. No, actually just 1 announcement. The Secretary is speaking with us at 1 o'clock. We need you all to be sat down in your seats before 1 o'clock, if possible, so he can start. He's going to be kind of in and out. So we're going to ask you all to finish the sessions, the last workshop this morning at 12:30, so you can get in here by 1:45, in your places by 1. The Secretary will start speaking at 1. And it's a really important moment for us, as Congressman Blumenauer said, to leave an impression on the new Secretary. So enjoy your breakout sessions. Come back here promptly for lunch, and have a great morning.